So I didn't have a great title for today, but there are a couple of things that are on my mind. A couple of weeks ago, somebody asked my thoughts on gold, and I hadn't really looked at it in a while, but I wanted to see what was driving gold prices and who's buying. So we'll talk about that. I want to touch on what I think is going to be a growing topic, which is universal basic income versus guaranteed income programs. As people are worried or scared of AI and scared of job losses and the like, and tech displacing people. I think that's an area that's going to get increased attention from politicians and the population. And then I want to wrap up with a interesting take from the Atlantic Council on five possible future scenarios for Russia now that President Putin secured his fifth term. So let's jump right into it. So gold demand has been mixed, and it tends to ebb and flow quite a bit over time. This is just a chart showing the different sources, whether it's jewelry, investments through ETFs, technology, central bank purchases, and then overall demand. You can see where it is. But central banks have been big players here, and you can see from this chart they're either generally all net buyers or all net sellers. They tend to move very closely, or they don't move at all. So you'll have the traders here and the guys who are buy and hold central bankers. But this is an interesting element of generally, as you can see, since 2010, they've been net buyers, and that makes sense when you're doing quantitative easing and the dollar's strengthening as a result of the dynamics that are going on. It makes sense why central banks might be moving away from currencies into gold. But that is what you can see from the way they've been buying. This is another look at who's been doing the purchases from the World Gold Council and the IMF. And what you can see here is central banks are the top line up here on the 1.4. And you can see this ETF sales have been negative, but overall retail has been pretty involved buyers, although they come and go quite a bit because retail buys on fear and greed. Central banks buy for different reasons, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But who's buying the gold? It starts to make sense of when you go country by country, why they're buying gold and building up their purchases. In China's case, they were the largest buyer last year. And what you can see is they were buying big. Why? Sanctions, the dollar, what's gone on with Russia. They've seen the playbook of how they might be approached if or countered if they invade Taiwan. So moving money out of dollars into gold makes a lot of sense. And I think they sold about $200 billion of treasuries last year. So I think they were funding some of their purchases of gold with treasuries. In Poland's case, there's war right on the border here. There are other worries that they're dealing with. Singapore is the geopolitical issues, and Libya's, funding the money in other areas. So these are the top players in it. A lot of countries are buy and hold. The U.S. tends to buy and hold their gold position. I don't think we've sold any since, or have sold anything meaningful since the 70s. So we're not big traders. The Bank of England actually sold all their gold in the early 2000s. And shortly after that, the World Gold Council was talking about starting a gold ETF. And in around 2002, ARS went all in on gold. We probably had anywhere from a 20 to 30 or 40% position in gold in our flagship portfolio for a lot of the next 10 years after that period. And there were a lot of reasons why. I'm get into that later if somebody is interested. Central banks, why are they buying gold? Well, I think historically you can see the reasons in the chart, but I think the real reasons right now are moving away from the dollar, strengthening up weakening balance sheets for these central banks and for the governments. And you also get liquidity without credit risk. And I think central banks are worried about that in a material way. But number one is historical position. And that's what I said. A lot of them don't sell, or they trade around a minor part, but keep the bulk of their gold position. It does do well in times of crisis as a performance. And you can see we're approaching a record today. Around 20, there's a 2,200. We're looking at projections of gold going to 2,300 in the near term. It is a relatively good inflation hedge and does have viewed as a store of value. I don't know if people view it as a portfolio diversifier because most people trade in and out, but the position size would be similar to what people are thinking about for crypto, usually a couple percent position in portfolios. But the idea of no default risk in the world we're living in today may take on increasing precedence. Um, so that's the reason they buy gold. I think you see more interest in gold, and it wouldn't surprise me if you see it continue to trend up. We are entering a season where you will have buying. Retail has not been as big a player as they've been in the past, but I think with some of the currency problems and other issues, I think you could see more retail money moving back into gold as well. But switching gears to the universal basic income and guaranteed income programs, just as a baseline, because they get used interchangeably, universal basic income is really everyone in the program gets it regardless of income or need, where guaranteed income programs are really designed for those with the highest need, to provide a floor, not to bring them out of poverty completely or to solve all their problems, but to provide a floor under which they will be able to not have to worry about going below, and how will they survive. So I think we've seen a lot of these programs in the past, and they're very popular. If you ask people, do you want a universal basic income program in your country? In Europe, the answer was 71% said yes. In the US, this latest survey was Hill Harris X poll said 49% of Americans would like it as well. And why? Well, you're getting free money for nothing. And I don't think they think about the implications of where that money is coming from and how it's going to be paid for, which is usually in the form of higher taxes. Finland did a big project over the last couple of years, and they looked at 2,000 unemployed people between ages 25 and 58. Each one received roughly $600 a month for 2 years. And the idea was that they would be happier and more willing to seek out employment because they were starting from a better position. Well, they certainly became happier. I think the outcome of that study was that happiness went up, but employment did not, and their interest in increasing employment did not. So not viewed as a great endorsement for it. Bridgewater a couple of years ago did a study, and I don't have it handy, and I only remember parts of it, but what I remember is they looked at if we had a UBI plan in the US at $1,000 a month, it would cost roughly $3.7 trillion, and you would not get the offset in economic growth or in tax revenues that come from that. So I don't think that's necessarily the way most people are going to go, because the bill that comes due for that is quite big. But these guaranteed income programs to help the neediest do make some sense, and they are increasing in popularity. So this is a chart that shows you some of the different programs that have been piloted or concluded. So green says they did a pilot program and concluded it. The gold is active programs in process right now. And you can see a lot of cities are involved in it. And the reasons I think are pretty interesting. We'll touch on some of the cities in a minute, but going back to the pandemic, and this chart shows you in the green, you see unemployment spiking. And then you see in the gold, inflation dropping and then starting to rise up again. Inflation is not quite back down to pre-pandemic levels, but employment did get there. But during the period after the pandemic hit, you started to see a number of programs being put in place. And these green bars are the different programs that were put in place for pilot programs in the US. And these are just a subsection of those programs. And I did a sample of some cities. And you can see that the number of participants it could be small, anywhere as low as 100 up to 3,200 or more. The monthly payments range anywhere from around $200 to $1,000 a month. And the duration of the programs go a year to 3 years. So this is what's going on in the US. It's going on elsewhere in the world. I think it's going to become a bigger topic of discussion because there is a growing need, and the haves and have-nots is something I've talked about for some time. And we are moving to a more bifurcated world where the rich are getting richer and the rest are struggling. And I think we can see this play out. What was interesting to me is where were they spending the money when they got it on? And this chart tells me they were spending it on needed services, not blowing it on things, booze and gambling and the like, which is what the fear is on welfare programs or welfare type programs. I think there are models that people could look at to work off of. I happen to have worked with the Church of Latter-day Saints, and their welfare program is, if you have a need, you go to the church, you get what you need from the church. They have a welfare store, you can get food, groceries, and the like, and then you work it off as part of your commission or part of your work to pay that off. I think there are other programs that can tie in getting benefits and getting work at the same time that gives them, the people, the better sense of purpose when we're doing these things. So it's not a welfare program, it's a work program. But I think we'll see more schemes here because the gap is getting much bigger as we discussed for some time here. So moving to the last topic I want to cover is what's next for President Putin and Russian leadership. And the Atlantic Council came up with 5 scenarios. It was Matt Henkel was the author of it, and his 5 scenarios are quite interesting. The first one is the status quo, that Putin stays, that he's done it for 25 years. He's really secured himself and eliminated a lot of the rivals that would be a threat, and that his plan is to wait out the West, wait for the US election, and see if he can get a better deal later on, or just continue to stall and let the slowness of getting aid to Ukraine give him the opportunity to win the war. That's one scenario. I'm not sure how that leaves the Russian people after that. I think we all have a pretty good sense of that. Second scenario is one we got a little bit of a taste of last year with Nationalists Rising, and that was that would become Putin's ouster, and far right or more nationalistic leaders who are frustrated with the pace of the war and that it wasn't wrapped up in a couple of weeks, and that we're dragging this on, and that there are more mobilization efforts and all that we really need to go even further in on this. And that would be the second option that they highlighted. The third one is a technocratic reset. Putin's out, goes to his estate by the Black Sea and lives out his life there. He's left alone pretty much. They might take some of the money back, but not too much. But there are good technocrats there. It's amazing what they've done economically with the sanctions, but it would not be a pro-West regime if that was the case. It would be more of the same with a slightly different element to it. The next scenario was Russia returns home and the democracy returns home. That is a much longer project to get put in place. It would have to require, I think, a much different mood on the ground there. But Putin would go out, there'd be the usual jockeying, and then you see a rise of a more liberal pro-Western style government where people might have the hope for a better life. And the last one is the one I fear most, which is chaos and civil war for a nuclear state, and that you have the Russian Federation dissolve into chaos. I think that's a concern. If you ask the author, he would say that the status quo is the most likely scenario, followed by Nationalists Rising. But I think this game strategy is something that will pick up more depending on how the war goes. You're starting to see more push for different types of negotiated settlements. And I think one of them that the technocrats would probably promote is a land for peace, where they go back to Crimea, back to the 2014 or pre-2020 borders and call it a day, and then everyone stays in their lane. I'm not sure that that's not too naive as to what would actually happen after that, but I always find it dangerous ground talking about Russia with the Russian and Ukrainian contingent here, Mark, so I'll turn it over to the experts for comment. I'm just a student trying to figure out what's going on. So we'll stop there.
Fair enough. So you gave us a lot of food for thought. You're entitled at your things you're thinking about. You've been thinking about a lot of things.
Well, the things that people have raised too on the calls, I try and bring back if I don't have the answer when they're asking, try and come back and figure out what it is.
Fair enough. So questions, comments? Radek?
Yeah, gladly. Thanks a lot, Stephen, for for a great presentation and this insights. I wanted just to add that what I found really interesting about UBI is that, for instance, Switzerland had a major voting in 2016 about implementing UBI for $2,000 per month for every citizen, and they voted no. And moreover, like I checked in the meantime, in September last year in Lucerne, there was another voting and they again voted against. So there are some societies that just do not see the need. However, Switzerland is quite a wealthy society, honestly.
Yeah.
So this is it. However, I wonder about this test because the economy is changing and it will rapidly change, leaving some people without work in future, probably, especially because of AI and some other factors. So I think this tests of UBI are necessary to see how the society and both economy will behave when it is implemented in the grander scale. So we have just some basic idea how it will work, because it will change the rules of economy as well. So that's all from me. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, I just want to add, I'm not a proponent or for or against these things. I haven't done enough work on them to fully understand them, but I believe with AI, these things will become much bigger topics and will be voted on a lot more, as you said. And you'll see very mixed results from it. The people who are either completely against it or fully on board for it. So it'll be very interesting and I think probably divisive again. So not that we need more things to be divisive about, but I think that's coming.
So all Polish so far. You have to be Polish to ask a question, Wanda.
It's not the question about the Polish gold, although that's intriguing. Stephen, I'd like to get your thinking on this universal income and charity versus work program. So there are two basic thinking when it comes to universal income. One is people are lazy, they don't want to work, so whatever we give them, it will sustain them. And there's another way of thinking is people want to work, they want to have an opportunity to work, therefore, any work program would be beneficial. And what we see in New York, cleaning the Times Square, and there are people working, I understand that this is a format of this universal income where they are given opportunity to work. With this opportunity to work programs, at least in the US, there were so many abuses from, charities dressed up in the religious organizations and brainwashing to the work camps where the owners benefited, not those people, but they are negative examples.
Mm-hmm.
And you show the number of cities experimenting with charity or the work programs. My question in a nutshell is it that difficult to create a meaningful not a charity, but the work program, or why there are not more attempts to that end? And is it a false economic promise, perhaps? So what's your thinking?
I think it's too early to know. I would do what you were insinuating, though. I would tie all these into training programs or job or work for it while you're not working. So we have plenty of things to do, and we don't have enough people to do them. There are things they could do, help out in caregiving. They could help out in a lot of ways, right? There's things there's needs that we have right now. I think cities and states need to think about the training programs that for the industries they're trying to support and trying to bring in. I just think in New York, I have a client who's a third generation tool and die maker for specialty metals. They can't find people, and all their people are retiring out. So you think about all the industries that have people that are aging out, you could start programs to backfill there and start to fill needs. So I think there's a way to match it up, but I don't think we have the political will to do it, to be honest with you. but you can get in. You have to have a real plan, and they're just throwing money right now. I think that's the problem. But real plans, these things could work if you do it right. My
Thank you.
sense.
Sanjeev, then Bill.
So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Stephen, as well. So on the UBI question, again, let me also give the same disclaimer that you did, Stephen, on that I'm on neither side of that. But if I look at, and I'm from India, if I look at relatively poor countries where there's no, if you look at the Maslow's theory of needs or hierarchy of needs, like if you don't give people food to eat, that society will not succeed and be comparable to, say, the United States or Japan or any of those countries. So in that sense, maybe the need is different for different ecosystems or different societies, but that's where my mind goes. Again, I'm torn also in the don't just give away money for free versus on the charity side versus work side. But there is a discussion to be had, at least that's safe to say, that it is good to have this discussion here as well as with policymakers and such to have, because it is not an obvious thing. It's if you have a 2-year program or a 3-year program, that's not the same as having, I can rely on this for the rest of my life and focus on things that take me to the next level, as opposed to what do I do for the next meal.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think the idea is there'll be a lot of different ideas, and I think cities are trying different approaches, and you notice the different time frames. I don't think a year is probably enough to know anything, but you're running into one other element, which is think about, a lot of it's Chicago's doing this, for example. They could least afford to do this. So I think you're going to run into cities that are running up against, and states and countries that are going to run up against limited fiscal space to do this. And then you're robbing Peter to pay Paul and all that kind of stuff. So I think there are real issues for this. But then you got to get into the math of if people aren't working and they're out committing crimes because they don't have the money, what do they do? So there's a lot that goes into it. Someone with I think there might be an AI for that, Mark, that they can figure this one out, but I can't.
Yeah.
I think Bill.
10,001 AIs for that. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. So, as always, very thoughtful today, Stephen. And further on the UBI, it's interesting because I know one of my former clients in Stockton, California, they have a pilot program, and I think have come out with somewhat the same response that you quoted in your discussion, that people are happier, but it really doesn't have much of a positive influence on employment. I know here in the Orlando area, there's a public-private partnership called Jobs Orlando that's heavily engaged by the faith community. I know our church is like really involved with it, and it's not that they support people monetarily, but they provide the tools to get them as prepared as possible to enter the workforce or re-enter the workforce. And they've been very successful with that program. Fortunately, Orlando is a growing area, so we had the benefit of a tailwind of employment behind us. But so there is some hope, that's out there. Also, wanted to make a quick comment, and if I may, there's one of my slides from last week that was on the cutting room floor, but I think it's interesting here.
You want to share a slide, Bill?
He's got
If
the
I
gold
may,
chart.
please. No, it's only one. It's only one, I promise. And here we go.
I actually love your slides, Bill.
Yeah, no, thank you.
I'd like you to do mine every week.
We should do that once.
That's right. I'll tell you what. I'll create the slides, and Stephen, you guess what they are. So anyway, this is one that I came across. I was going to discuss, but just didn't have the time at the very beginning. This shows the marginal debt or the marginal benefit of debt. So it's debt per thousands, or it's nominal GDP per dollar of incremental debt. So what this is showing essentially is how much additional GDP are we generating for each additional dollar of debt that we're putting on. And you can see that, the number's been declining, really since the 60s, which hasn't been all that great. And furthermore, it's south of $1 and currently is at 43 cents. So obviously, if you're increasing your debt, but you're not getting much nominal GDP in exchange for it, this is not a good situation. It's very much a downhill slide. And you can think about sort of how, from a very macro standpoint, how do we get ourselves out of kind of the pickle that we're in and the pickle that might be, increased if we add on a significant income program, like UBI. And, with the tax base would have to grow. So that's pulling more, out of the economy. Productivity will help in terms of boosting GDP. But as long as debt continues to grow at an uneconomic rate, then it's a vicious circle downward. And ideally you should have it either at $1 or more. So that sort of begs a very big question in terms of how do we make the government more productive, which is a whole another topic. But at any rate, I wanted to drop this in because clearly, if we institute a UBI, as you say, Stephen, the first thought would be to increase taxes, and we're already in a pretty tough situation as it stands.
And you usually don't get the offsetting revenue. You're not going to collect more in taxes than you're paying out.
Right.
Is the reality. So I think Matt's next.
Matt.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that really quickly. There's just coming from that world, I've worked with a lot of these organizations that kind of serve these interests. But Bill, you bring up some stellar points. And who was it? Who wrote something in the comments? It was Damien or Duncan? Duncan. I think it was you that you said something about how nonprofit organizations are more accountable than government, which is almost unequivocally true. What we see though is that the reason why these charitable organizations end up being so much more productive with individuals is because they're giving something to an individual that's not necessarily deserved by that individual. So it's received in a different way. And that's the nature of charity in the word itself. But then if you change it to the government, you suddenly turn it to an entitlement. An entitlement is something that I have to receive because it's going to be given to me. So and then entitlements are stuck and you got them for generations because no politician will ever back out of an entitlement, right? So you come back to the accountability side and all that. But these kinds of programs, I think that's the biggest problem we're going to find with UBI. And Stephen, I'm thrilled that you had those statistics. I'd love to get that study that you were citing too, because that was something that I know a lot of people have been wondering for a long time. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there. The thing with the Church of Latter-day Saints, what they do with folks, those kind of programs are commonly found too in a number of different faith-based organizations, and they're widely well received. They've got a lot of problems, but they're well received and tend to have a lot of productivity.
One of the things is they give people a sense of self-worth that that entitlements don't give you at a time that you really need it, when you're feeling down about your where you are in your lot in life. And having that support, it does make a big difference. So
the handout versus the hand up, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Matt, you want to just speak, because we've had a lot of conversations on the side of, when we talk about 361 connecting to deals, capital, talent, partners, and optimizing your philanthropic resources. Part of that is interconnecting everybody, not raising money. But we have had a challenge, admittedly, because there's no revenue model. We don't want to charge revenue, unless you guys convince me otherwise that we should. But Matt, you volunteered to be, sort of carry a co-flag carrier. Maybe like where you're coming at it on this.
You mean from bringing everybody under one flag, one umbrella for one cause, or
actually no, I believe in a big set of umbrellas. I don't think we have to. I don't interconnect all the umbrellas. So I guess it does feel like a big collective global umbrella. But maybe just introduce yourself, because you've been thinking about this space for a while.
Oh, I have. Yeah. So my name is Matt Johns. I've been in the philanthropic space for a couple decades, and then I just recently entered into the investment banking and this other world. So I've got kind of a different perspective from maybe a lot of folks. I've worked very much on the ground, going into people's homes after Hurricane Harvey and other major events like that, into homes that look fine from the outside but have 10 feet of mold growing on the inside, that people and children are living in. So just situations like that. So I've smelled situations, if you will, because it's one thing to see it and read it, but it's a different thing to smell it and experience it with them. And I've been blessed enough to have that kind of experience and perspective. But I've also seen a lot of programs that have worked really well. I've worked a lot with government entities, worked very closely and helped shape some government programs and things like that too, and worked on the advocacy side. So I'm very familiar on public policy. I'm very familiar with actual boots on the ground efforts being made. And I'm very familiar with the individual circumstance and how incentives work from a different, we'll just say charitable versus entitlement standpoint. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for, Mark, but as far as
that's good. I just want people to know where you're coming from. That's all. That's good.
Thank you.
Sanjeev?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Matt. I'll have to.
Oh, by the way, I think about it. I'm knitting bankers who want to do good, right? So Matt, I'm bringing an umbrella, and Sanjeev is also formally joining.
Yeah.
Can I say?
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Formally joining 361, and he continues to do things with 50 family offices that he works for, but we're going to be working together, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah. But on the nonprofit side, your on the field aspect to it. We'll connect offline, but I have something to run by you just to get your thoughts on it.
I'd love to. You bet. And welcome to the 361 team officially.
Thanks.
We're all part of the 361 team.
Mark, I sent you the invite. If you could, I don't know if you could.
All right. Sorry.
Link.
Find that.
If anyone wants to join the call, we're doing it noon today. Or if you sign up, you'll get the replay. If you can't listen now, you can get the replay whenever.
I put the link in the chat, by the way.
Oh, thank you,
you.
Andy. Appreciate it. You're a step ahead when Nessa's not here.
Wanda. See if I can put the.
I'd like to share a quick reaction to this intriguing slide about GDP per $1 of borrowed capital. So, Bill, I think it's really thought-provoking, but I would caution against this conclusion on two premises. One, the GDP is not a perfect measure of our economy and growth in the digital space. By definition of GDP, the value of data is not captured, and the whole economy right now is driven by the value of data. So economists are pulling their hairs to recognize what is the better measure of the economic growth. But in itself, that chart is really, really intriguing. If we would find a better measure of how the economic growth is reflected and compare it against the debt, I think that would be a very valid point for a discussion. And count me in for charity versus capital. I spent 10 years in nonprofits as well, so I have my own perspective to that on that sector as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, good point, Wanda. I think it's probably the difference between sort of the net income, if you will, versus the valuation of assets. Because clearly, if you're looking at valuation, then you have the kinds of things that you're talking about that's in there. So, but yeah,
And the productivity overall, by the definition of productivity, looks differently when you take into account digital assets and digital economy. So that productivity in terms of GDP is only a fraction of productivity that we see today. I'm not, there are many more smarter people that deal with this issue, including central banks, as I understand, but it's just, we are in different economy than GDP indicator was created for.